This is Suicide Prevention Month, designed to raise awareness of an epidemic. Every 90 minutes, someone between the ages of 15 and 24 takes his or her life. The young woman you're about to meet tonight was 17. Her parents share Alexandra's story with Jim Axelrod in our continuing series, Eye on America.
Tonight was beautiful. I saw the moon, I saw the stars.
The home video will look so familiar to so many parents. The sweet little girl singing and dancing her way to her teen years,
Alexandra,
where she's recognized for achieving outside the home.
And please consider me for the National Honor Society.
And thoroughly cherished inside it.
Okay.
Like, this was awesome, Alexandra. She was such a happy girl.
Happy birthday to you.
And so motivated and so just full of life.
Dear Alexandra.
But familiar will turn to terrifying when parents hear the whole story of Alexandra Valores. Just weeks after a family ski vacation,
give a smile.
This 17-year-old high school junior, straight-A student, class officer, and robotics whiz
Not too bad.
made her bed, tidied her room, and walked to a highway overpass in Grafton, Massachusetts.
I leaned over the embankment and looked down and I saw her.
Dean Valores, Alexandra's father.
I was just hoping for warmth. Do you know what I mean? But there was no warmth. It was done. Then all the cars kept driving by. My daughter's on the side of the road. Nobody saw this. And she's cold.
Nearby, Dean and his wife Alicia found 2 journals in their daughter's belongings.
There was just so much joy in everything she did. And it doesn't match what was in that journal.
200 pages of self-loathing and despair.
You are broken.
You are a burden. You are lazy. You're a failure.
She was a highly motivated achiever.
But that's how she felt inside.
Such a sharp and confusing contrast to who they thought was their happy oldest child, strumming her way through adolescence and still talking to her parents.
You're having all these great conversations.
Great conversations. It just doesn't seem possible, but it's what reality was. Because it's written right here.
With teen suicide at a 40-year high for young women Alexandra's age, and now the second leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds of both sexes, it is this disconnect that most haunts Dean and Alicia Valores. The girl who seemed to love it last November when her father took her to a concert went home and wrote, "I hated it. I hate myself for that."
The journal is a chronicle of deterioration.
I think so.
I'd say so.
I think so.
Which is why they're taking this pain public that most keep private, headlining suicide prevention walks, giving in-depth interviews about their daughter's death.
The hurt, the sadness is evolving. And now there's this thing called living. So then I'm a good father, good husband, and a good person.
They hope that in sharing the story of their daughter, maybe another family will be spared this trauma.
What will I miss by dying tonight? The possibility of getting better.
There's a lot of other kids out there that are like her, that are high achievers, that are balancing a lot. That's what makes her very relatable, and why maybe it's affecting people, and why they're listening is because I have a child like this too.
And in the pain of what Alex wrote to her parents in her final entry hours before she took her life, "Don't blame yourselves for not seeing warning signs," is also what the Valores family hopes to salvage from her death. Some meaning for others.
There's so many emails.
In June, the morning after an interview was published, they found this note on their doorstep.
What you have said in Alexandra's article truly changed my life. Knowing that families are talking to their kids about their mental health, it lets me know that she didn't die in vain. She's having such a huge impact. And that feels really good.
It's hard to talk about and process this story. Jim, I know that you and producer Wendy Cron spent months working on it. How is the family doing now?
Well, it's been a little more than 6 months. So many levels of pain and devastation to process. I do think it's extremely important that we thank Dean and Alicia Valores for being so open with us in discussing their daughter's death. Those journal entries are brutal to read, but sharing them is their way of prodding other parents to check in with their kids, even those, or especially those, who don't show those classic signs of being at risk.
And they already have helped. For a list of resources on suicide prevention, we should mention you can go to our website tonight at cbsnews.com.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our third in the series of Raising Positive Children, Recognizing the Signs: Cyberbullying, Suicide, and Depression. I'm Commissioner Seipel, and it is my honor to be here tonight with you all and with such dedicated folks to help us understand what this situation is and what we can do to help our families. I would first like to recognize Mayor Frank Wardis, and thank you always for your support, Mayor. My commission colleagues are here. Oh, I can't see. I'm sorry, I can't see with the light. My commission colleagues, our Pembroke Pines Police Department, our Victims Advocate Unit, Senator Gary Farmer, Senator Lauren Book, Representative Chevron Jones, Representative Rick Stark, and participating agencies in our community. The League of Women Voters, we want to thank them for being here this evening. 211, who has been a partner with us since the beginning. Jackie and Harry Rosen and Joel Smith that are here tonight from FISP. Rabbi Mordecai Andruger is here supporting this. City Manager Dodge is here. Leah Carpenter from Memorial Hospital West. Thank you all, and it is my honor once again to tell you how fortunate we are as a community. I'm not introducing him, I'm just telling you he's going to be here, Dr. Scott Poland. And I'd like to tell you this, that we are here as a community to help our families deal with today's issues. Our children are facing very different times than most of us dealt with growing up. For my children, the biggest worry they had was to be in the house before the streetlights went on. They came rushing home on their bicycles, jumped off, and left them laying in the front yard. No need to lock them up. Bullying did happen even back then, but the problem was usually solved on the playground after school. There would be a tussle, but the next day, everyone was friends again. Today, the hurt and shame of cyberbullying being spread worldwide is more than our children can bear. Teen suicide rate is at a 40-year high for females 15 to 19 years of age. It is the second leading cause of death for both sexes, ages 15 to 24 years old. Every 90 minutes, someone dies by suicide. Staggering, staggering numbers and data. The pressure that's placed on today's youth to excel in everything is immense and sometimes harmful. Don't get me wrong, I am all for setting goals, working hard, and being the best possible person that you can be. But the stress level is sometimes too much to cope with, and our kids begin thinking that they are less than they should be. That happened to a young lady named Alexandra, the video that you saw. She was a high achiever, school honor roll, National Honor Society, class president, captain of her soccer team. She was the oldest of 3 children. Both her parents were college educated, and they lived in a typical community, Anywhere, USA. She died by suicide 2 years ago. Her family was devastated. They had no idea she was having such a difficult time coping. After her death, her parents found her journals. She had made notations such as, "I am negative. I am dysphoric. I am conflicted. I am unhappy. I am stressed. I am stretched so thin. I am lost. While contemplating suicide, Alexandra wrote in her journal, "What will I miss tonight?" And her answer to herself was the possibility of getting better. As she was contemplating her suicide, she was asking herself, what am I going to miss if I do this? And she answered herself by saying, the possibility of getting better. She also wrote to her parents and said, don't blame yourself. Obviously, she knew that she had been pretty good at keeping warning signs from her family. Everything seemed to them that life was great. She was happy and acting like a normal teenager, sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes you don't know what, but a normal teenager. So I'm going to ask all of you to ponder this. On a regular schedule, we take our children to their pediatricians and dentists for checkups, immunizations, booster shots, cavities, braces. They are well cared for with their physical health. What are we doing about their mental health? That is something we need to delve into, the mental health of what our children are going through these days. So I want to thank you all for being here and for continuing to support our Raising Positive Children. I will tell you once again, I am very, very proud to be a commissioner in the City of Pembroke Pines, and I am very proud of my city for sponsoring events such as this, where we reach out to our community and bring professionals here to provide as much help and answers as we can. It is my honor now and my pleasure to introduce to you Michael Castellano, who is the principal of our Charter West campus.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, and thank you for attending our third installment of Raising Positive Children, recognizing the signs of cyberbullying, suicide, and depression. Before I introduce our guest speaker this evening, I'd like to take a minute to recognize some people in the audience. Our educators, our principals, please stand and be recognized. Please stay standing. Our school resource officers, please stand. Members of our police and fire department, please stand. Our first responders, please stand. Our parents, please stand. Family members, child advocates, and elected officials, please stand. The only ones who should be seated are the students. Students, as you look around this room, let there be no doubt that we are responsible for raising positive children. It is up to us to keep our children safe, well-educated, grounded, and ready to take on the challenges of tomorrow. You may be seated. And now to our guest speaker, Dr. Scott Poland. He is a professor at the College of Psychology and a co-director of the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University. He is a licensed psychologist and an internationally recognized expert on youth suicide, school crisis, and parenting in challenging times. He has authored or co-authored 5 books and many chapters and articles dedicated to this topic. His 5th book, entitled Suicide in Schools, was published in 2015. He also recently co-authored the Suicide Safer Schools Plan for the state of Texas and the Crisis Action Plan School Toolkit for the state of Montana. He was our first guest speaker for Raising Positive Children in March, and now back by popular demand, please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Poland.
Thank you very much, Michael. Indeed, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. Most of all, I hope to say some things that will be helpful and meaningful to every single one of you. We have a very serious subject tonight, cyberbullying as well as suicide. And you might be wondering, what is the relationship between suicide and bullying? We're going to talk about that tonight. And somehow I know I'm not the only person here that had their life affected by a suicide. I lost my father when I was 25. I was a counseling student. I'm sure there was something in that textbook, but I just didn't think that it could ever happen in my family. If you lost a friend, you lost a relative, you lost a student, I have some idea about what you've gone through. And the bottom line is, we have to talk about this subject more. When we actually bring it up, it gives a young person the chance to unburden themselves and realize they're not the first person to feel this way. There is help available, and we are going to be there for them every single step of the way. How many of you are parents of adolescents? Would you mind raising your hands? Oh, I am so sorry. But of course, I don't mean that. But in today's world, it's not enough to know your kid's friends. You got to know the kid's friends' parents. You have to be the one that absolutely knows what's going on. And the sad, tragic suicide of Alexandra, I imagine her parents wished strongly that they'd pay more attention to those journals she was writing in. And by the way, most suicide prevention in this country, it is driven by survivors. People like Harry and Jackie Rosen, who lost their son. They are never going to give up. And when you lose a loved one to suicide, it's the most complicated grief there is. The literature says it's like they left a skeleton in your closet. And it is so important that we reach out to families that have been impacted by suicide. And I wanted to give just a quick example. My brother called me last week. My rich brother. By the way, he has 3 homes, and one of those homes is on Marco Island. And you've probably been to Marco Island. Marco Island is like perfect. There's not a lawn that hasn't been mowed. And my brother always jokes about what he calls Marco Midnight. That's 9 o'clock. Everybody is home, they're in bed, all the retirees. But my brother said he had just arrived at his condo, and he was horrified to hear that Brian, his next door neighbor, was seen in the parking lot 2 days ago holding a gun to his head. And I said to my brother, well, hopefully somebody took Brian to the emergency room. No, that didn't happen. But what about his guns? The guns must be removed from his home. My brother said, well, I talked to his wife about that. She said, they're really Brian's guns. I don't have a right to remove them. Then my brother said, well, what difference would it make if we removed the guns? Wouldn't Brian just find another way? Steve, the bottom line is probably not. You ever heard of a website called Means Matter? It's at Harvard. And the website summarized all the research from around the world, basically saying you remove the gun, which is what we need to remove in America, then there's every chance the person is going to live. Now that I've mentioned guns, let me be clear. I'm not here to question your right to own a gun. I'm simply going to say, with that right comes a responsibility to safeguard that gun from a troubled, impulsive, depressed, substance-abusing, mentally ill person that might reside in your very own home. So it's a question of responsibility. And around the world, when they have raised the barriers on the bridge, the suicide rates go down. It is that simple. Finally, after 50 years of consternation, they're finally putting a barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge. It will be completed in 2020. And one of the things that I know is happening around the country is young people, unfortunately, are threatening school violence. They are not thinking, they're doing stupid, impulsive things with comments or postings. And I was in Huntsville, Alabama 2 weeks ago, and they were very distressed, and they were saying, a 7-year-old boy, a loaded gun, unlocked, and now he brought it to school. He managed to shoot himself. Thankfully, it was a minor injury. But you know what they want? And what I believe needs to happen all over the country, we have to hold the parents accountable. We're going to charge an 11-year-old kid with a second-degree felony. Let's charge their parents. They are the ones not safeguarding those guns. So very important to consider what is called means restriction, taking away the means. Now let's move on into our topic, and we are going to be looking at Bullying. You know what I sometimes hear from adults? I sometimes hear, oh, come on, Scott, bullying's a part of life. It's kind of like a rite of passage. Doesn't everybody get bullied? You just have to get through it. Well, the bottom line is it does not have to be that way. Bullying takes its toll. There's literature saying if you were bullied in school, it might bother you for as long as a decade. And then there's the question of, is there bullying in the workplace? Absolutely, I believe there is. You know, I gave a talk last week to Parkland parents, and there's a little acronym, TALK. The T is for talking. The A is for constantly assessing how is your child doing. The L is for listening. And the bottom line is that's much more important than the talking. Finding that shared time when your kid will truly talk to you. And be careful not to give them advice. In fact, as a psychologist, the two words I almost never use, I understand. Could I really? Unless something like that has happened to me. And the K is for kindness. I don't know about you, but I believe we need a lot more kindness in our world. And we need people that are actually leading our country to demonstrate kindness and compassion. And one of the statements last week to the Parkland parents, pretty simple. I believe strongly that when a child lives in a home where there is unconditional love and when there is stability, they can overcome almost anything. And your attendance here tonight, it's really sending a very positive message to your children. And there's something, it's a simple thing that I said last time, but I want to repeat it. I hope every single one of you will go home tonight and tell your sons and daughters they are the most wonderful children who ever lived. Not for the person they will become, but just for the child they are today. You show them that love every day, every single way. You've given them a tremendous advantage in this world. And at the root of youth suicide is simply untreated or undertreated mental illness, often coupled with adverse childhood experiences. What are those? An adverse childhood experience is living in poverty, living with a mentally ill or a substance abusing family member, being physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. If we can do something to stop those adverse childhood experiences. I'm reminded of a poem that a young lady left behind. It was entitled, Dear Sir, Father, don't blame me for not knowing you. I have the picture of you holding me once. It was the last time and why. And as parents, the bottom line is we brought these children into this world together. We need to be partners forever in safeguarding and supporting those children. And in Colorado 2 weeks ago, I used that example. Please go home and tell your children, yes, they are the ones you always wanted. And a mom came up to me. She said, I texted both my son and daughter. They are in college. I told them how much I love them. They immediately texted back. And one of them said, Mom, you're the mother I always wanted. So it's very important in our families that we have this unconditional love and stability. Bullying tends to peak in middle school, although we certainly have bullying in elementary and high schools as well. Cyberbullying. I'll be honest, I want to say, thankfully all 4 of our children are raised. I didn't have to deal with all the technology and the digital age. However, we have 15 grandchildren, so I'm very concerned about them as well. And do you often see, like the first thing mom and dad do in a restaurant is hand their 3-year-old their phone? I mean, we need to learn to talk to each other in our families. And I had a slide that I could have showed you tonight. It's a picture of children in 2018 playing outside. You can probably visualize it. The kids are all outside, but everybody is on their devices. We need to get back to some things like shooting baskets, chasing a ball, playing kick the can, kids working things out and actually being outside and interacting with each other. And then the question up here is, Why don't kids tell an adult when they're the victim of bullying? The bottom line is they think it's only going to get worse. They don't think the adults can do anything about it. And by the way, what should be the response of the adult? You do not deserve this. I am here for you every step of the way. We will get this stopped. And that'll be a part of the discussion tonight in terms of schools and parents. I'd like to highlight Common Sense Media. It is a tremendous resource for you. You can't decide about whether the video game, whether the television program, whether the movie, whether or not they're appropriate. Go to Common Sense Media and get the developmental recommendations. But most importantly, behind me is this statement. 46% of the time, if the parents actually paid attention, kids say they would change their behavior online. I had a chance last month. I was in a high school in Harriman, Utah. I'm really sorry to tell you that 7 students that attended that large high school died by suicide last year. But I got a chance to talk first to the students. And I asked them, I said, tonight I'm going to talk to your parents. What do you want me to say to them? What do you want your parents to do? The overwhelming message was, I want them more involved in my life, yes. But I want them listening more and talking less. I want them to truly try to understand all the pressures that are on a teenager today. Cyberbullying, is it really the school's responsibility? By the way, what happens when we try to approach the parents of the bully? Does that go well? Do anybody of you remember, it was about a year ago, the dad jumped on the school bus and confronted the kid who was bullying his child? Dad got arrested. Now, the other day, a counselor said, my kid's being bullied. I'm a counselor. I'm trained. Believe me, I can approach the other parents. I'll do it in a very rational way. I will not lose my cool. My advice was, it's your child. I'm afraid you might lose your cool. Well, what should I do? You need to talk to the people that are in charge, whether it's a school event, whether it's a community event. You need to talk to the people who are in charge and let them know about the bullying that's happening. So one of those 15 grandchildren just started 6th grade, and immediately he's being bullied largely in the locker room at school in Virginia. Our daughter approached the coach. Let me be honest, the coach didn't really do much. And she said, I want to talk to the principal. And at that point, things started to change with better supervision and consequences for the bullies. Of course, our daughter wasn't told what the consequences would be, but she was very satisfied that once the issue reached the principal, something was going to be done. Now, the commissioner already stated, unfortunately, bullying is a big problem. Suicide is a big problem. The most dramatic increase for middle school girls. There was a report that came out this summer in June, and here's what it said. Suicide rates have gone up in every single state in America except for Nevada. And suicide rates have gone up for every age group, every race, and every gender. And perhaps the biggest myth holding suicide prevention back is we are afraid to talk about it. And what is the connection between bullying and suicide? Well, first of all, at the foundation of youth suicide is untreated or undertreated mental illness, often in combination with adverse childhood experiences. So we're never going to be able to clearly say that being bullied caused a suicide. But there is a strong association between bullying and suicide. So what's a take-home message for you? If you know your kid is being he's the victim of bullying. If you know a student in your school is the victim of bullying, do not hesitate to ask them thoughts about hopelessness, giving up, and thoughts of suicide. And the commissioner talked about the importance of mental health and focusing on that. And as she was talking, it reminded me to tell you, we have a national recommendation. Every teenager seeing the physician for any reason should be screened for depression and thoughts of suicide. And that little questionnaire should be scored before they walk out of the office. I hope the physicians in Pembroke Pines know and are implementing that recommendation. So, screen times. The data indicates that kids are spending 6.5 hours or more on their screens. The screens are interfering with sleep. Sleep deprivation is definitely connected to depression and suicidal thoughts. So many of you said you were parents of adolescents. I know we're not going to change the technology usage overnight. But what about a conversation around the kitchen table about the amount of time and setting a goal for the entire family? Sometimes, you know what I hear from the moms? It's my husband. I agree totally with technology-free meals, but my husband, he's not willing to do it. Some schools are having what they call a blackout afternoon or a blackout day where everybody turns off their devices. In our families, we could aim for a blackout evening where no one will be on their devices. We might actually talk to each other. And developmentally, let's be very cautious and slow with our younger children. I get questions like this. Well, my daughter, she's 8 years old. She wants an iPhone. But you know, I'm not sure I really want her to have 24-hour internet access. Well, why would your daughter need an iPhone at all? I mean, don't you take her to school? They literally open the car door and she walks in. After school, do they put her back in your car? Well, yes, they do. Well, why does she need an iPhone at all? That's because all of her friends have it. Well, Mom, let me think about, when did I actually get a smartphone with internet access? I think I was 56. Why would your daughter need this at age 8? Do not be in a hurry for all of this technology. In one presentation, I said, don't let technology steal your child. Somebody jumped up and said, they've already been stolen. And that's probably the case for a lot of your adolescent children. But through discussion, we could try to dial it back and try to get just a little more sanity in our lives. So, screen time is interfering with a lot. No screens in cars and bedrooms. By the way, I have to acknowledge that navigation feature on the phone is pretty supreme, isn't it? When was the last time you ever unfolded a map to try to figure out where you were going? So let's use that navigation feature only on the audio mode instead of staring at that screen while we are trying to drive. And then here's a phrase that I first heard at a Florida prevention conference. Don't be intoxicated. The modeling you do, everything you do, your children are watching you. If you text while you drive, if you drink and get in the car, they're watching how you respond to the policeman who stops you. They're watching how you respond and treat your neighbor and your partner. There's actually a quote that goes something like this. What we do speaks so loudly to our children that when we actually try to talk to them, they cannot hear us. So maybe a place to start is basically with you modeling cutting back on the technology usage. The other day I emailed one of my friends. He didn't get back to me for 24 hours. I was wondering what might have happened, and he said no. He and his kids and his partner decided no technology for 24 hours. How do we balance all this technology with all the other things in our life? So here's an 11th grade scenario. Basically, a young woman, lots of pressure, high performing academically, on the dance team, but pretty constantly talking to her friends about being overwhelmed and being stressed out, and that she's thinking of ending her life. Unfortunately, some of our classmates, they're like tired of hearing this. And by the way, can you think of the person in your life who gives you the benefit of their negativity like every time you see them? Can you visualize that person? Well, here's a tip for tonight. Stay away from that person. So unfortunately, her friends started encouraging her. They were just tired of all this talk. And so the messages going back and forth came, just do it. You won't feel the pain any longer. One of the things I'm really sad to tell you is I had to respond to a suicide where 4 of her friends admitted to me on a Monday morning. We told her Saturday night was the night she was supposed to die. You know, I think those kids will probably remember that final conversation for the rest of their lives. But in my scenario behind me, the young woman is very distressed. Her friends, so-called friends, are telling her, just follow through and kill yourself. So she starts gathering all the pills and all the alcohol. Thankfully, Mom just happened to enter her room and prevented that suicide. There are actually 4 cabinets in your home that I'm going to encourage you to take charge of. You can probably figure out what they are. The medicine cabinet, the liquor cabinet, the gun cabinet, and yes, the internet. By the way, if you have a 12-year-old girl and you are thinking about getting them a laptop with a camera in it, what do you think I am going to say to you? Don't do it. Maintain only desktops. Put it on the kitchen counter. You ever walked into a room and have your kid immediately turn the screen away? You ever noticed that they've erased the entire history trail? You have to have conversations in your family. And all that technology, the bottom line, it is a privilege. It is not a right. But back to the scenario, what does Mom do? Let me be honest, Mom has got to get school involved. School personnel are going to say, respond to cyberbullying, which, by the way, is the perfect forum for what is called relational bullying, because you're spreading rumors. You're excluding someone from something. And I sometimes hear this. Well, bullying by definition has to be repetitive. It was only one thing that was posted online. Okay, but 42 kids responded and said they supported that mean, humiliating post. Therefore, I believe it does meet the definition of being repetitive, being nasty, being humiliating. Sometimes adults say, how do we know it isn't good-natured teasing? Well, it's all about how did that kid perceive that interaction. When it's teasing, people walk away on about the same level. When it's bullying, it's nasty, it's humiliating, it's all about power. One person walked away very proudly, the other person not so much. So we can't really tell without talking to them about how did you receive that particular interaction. And sometimes we think we should just tell these 2 kids they need to work it out. But again, back to the point that bullying is all about power. They don't have the ability to work this out together. In fact, that's where adults must get involved, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So Mom is probably not going to get anywhere by contacting the so-called friends of her daughter. Mom needs to start with the school. And the school might think, what's this have to do with us? It happened last night. It happened over the weekend. But the bottom line is it always impacts learning. And because it impacts learning, school personnel must and will respond. Counselors often say at the middle school level, Monday there's a lot of drama because of all those things that were being posted over the weekend. Parents must pay attention. There's technology that you could employ that could measure every stroke, every message. Some of you may need to do that. Most of you probably do not. But again, all the technology is a privilege. Talk to your children about it. Set reasonable limits. Incredibly important. Here are a couple of the myths about bullying. The idea that bullies were victims themselves, for the most part, no, they weren't. They're actually very calculating in their behavior. They often get what they want. Most of them were not abused, not the bullies. Kids that were victims sometimes have a history of being abused. It's a problem only for the schools to solve. It is a societal problem. And that's what's so great tonight, to have schools and various agencies and law enforcement, parents, even students themselves. What about this idea that you should fight back? That doesn't work very well. What you really need to do is walk away, tell an adult. And in all honesty, it's like some kids seem to have a target on their back, where other kids, it's like they seem to assess the situation pretty quickly. They're able to skate through it, get out of there, and they are not the target of bullying. In particular, a lot of students with special education disabilities are often the target of bullying. I wish I could stand up here and say the bullies outgrow that behavior. Unfortunately, most of them carry that behavior well into adulthood, well into the workplace, which makes it very challenging for all of us. So one of the things that was mentioned with the video Eye on America about Alexandra, her parents were basically devastated, but they also, it's like they didn't see any warning signs. Well, I'm here tonight to tell you that 90% of the time, at least, there are warning signs, and we're going to talk about those. Unfortunately, her parents didn't see those warning signs. They might have been really subtle. One time a mom said, well, there was only that one thing. The day before my son killed himself, he said, Mom, do you think it's right? Musicians are being sued, and parents are claiming music lyrics cause you suicide. The mom just wishes she'd have sat down with them and said, funny you would ask that. Let's talk about this. By the way, here's one of my frustrations. A kid goes in the hospital, they've been suicidal, and now let's say a month or two have passed. What's probably the last thing in the world mom and dad ever want to bring up with their kid? They're thinking, thank God that's over. I don't have to worry about suicide anymore. In reality, they should find that shared time and gently say something like, have you ever had those thoughts again? It would not be unusual to have those thoughts. I am here for you every step of the way. And I'm going to go back and finish the example I gave with my brother and the question of getting his neighbor Bob treatment and removing the guns. You know what I'm really proud to tell you? After I talked to my brother and said, Bob's being treated for advanced stages of Parkinson's, but apparently his physician does not realize how depressed Bob is. Bob has to tell his doctor he held a gun to his head 2 days ago. And I'm really proud to tell you, my brother went along. And I'm also proud to say he talked to Bob's wife and got all those guns removed from the home. Now, Bob is getting treatment for his depression. He's still dealing with Parkinson's. And I said, Bob needs to know all the crisis helpline, crisis numbers. We saw one of those up earlier, 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-SUICIDE. My brother says, well, Bob, because of his Parkinson's, he can't possibly push all those buttons. Well, Stevie doesn't have to. All he has to do is pick one. Push the button and tell Siri. Does everybody here know? If I were to pull out my phone right now and tell Siri I want to kill myself, do you all know what happens? Siri responds, may I connect you to the National Crisis Helpline. Think about all of the young people who have smartphones. I'm willing to bet Alexandra, in that tragic feature, she had a smartphone. Maybe nobody ever talked to her about pick up the phone, push the button. A trained crisis responder will talk to you 24 hours a day. I cannot overemphasize tonight, the biggest problem is we don't talk about suicide enough. Let me quote our Surgeon General. 45,000 suicides a year in this country. We got to talk about it more. Our schools, our homes, and in our churches. There's an associative relationship between suicide and bullying. There's also a relationship between self-injury and suicide. Those young people, and it's often middle schoolers, engaging in superficial cutting or burning. And by the way, do you know why they do it? It releases endorphins. That's the biological theory. Obviously, we wish kids were out there chasing a ball, swimming laps, getting on a machine, doing something physical to release those endorphins. Secondly, it regulates emotions. It helps kids shut out the severe argument their parents are having in the other room. But the bottom line is self-injury as a coping mechanism has diminishing returns. And about 30% of the time, the young person who repeatedly engaged in self-injury ultimately makes a suicide attempt. They're actually acquiring the capability of suicide. They're getting comfortable harming their body through their self-injury. So when we know a kid is a cutter, for example, we shouldn't hesitate to ask them about thoughts of suicide. Now here's the youth risk behavior surveillance data at the high school level for the state of Florida. So you see about 11% of high school kids say they were electronically bullied. About 14.3% reported being bullied on school property. Nearly 1/3 reported feeling sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more. And then let's just jump to the bottom figure. 7.6% made a suicide attempt. So what's that mean in a high school of 2,000? That means our best estimate is 152 kids that walked into that high school this morning made a suicide attempt in the last 12 months. Who's the most likely to make an attempt tomorrow? That is the kid with the previous history. Do you know what's really scary about this? For the most part, their parents, their teachers, their counselors have no idea. So who knows all about their suicidal behavior? That would be their friends, the very friends that we've never talked to about what to do to help yourself or to help a friend. And as you look at the data behind me, could anybody argue that, oh, we should never talk about suicide? These kids are facing the fact that they have suicidal friends. They need your guidance about what to do. And I'm reminded of one of my friends. His son, Carl, got a text message that his girlfriend, who wasn't doing well after the breakup, was going to kill herself. Carl thankfully went to his dad. His dad said, "Carl, get your coat." Carl said, "Why do I need my coat? We live in Kansas. It's cold. It's the winter. We're going to her house right now." So that's the kind of climate we need, where we immediately network. We take action whenever anybody is having these thoughts of suicide. They're the warning signs. Giving away prized possessions, making out a will, checking out a book about suicide, fascination with death and dying. Years ago, I read a book by a woman named Charlotte Ross, and she said, young people are both attracted to and repelled by the idea of suicide. I actually met her in California And the first thing I did was repeated her quote. And she said, nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever remembered that. But absolutely, kids are attracted and repelled by the thought of suicide. They seek out information. They need to get the information from you. Suicide is not fate. It is not destiny. It does not have to happen. There are evidence-based treatment. Depression is the most common mental illness when somebody dies by suicide, and there are very effective treatments. There's a lot of concern about overwhelming academic pressure on young people. And I'm really here tonight to ask you to be reasonable. You know, the bottom line is, I couldn't bring myself to tell our youngest daughter, well, you are not going to be going to the University of Texas as you planned. I mean, she got 1 B in an AP class. That's all it took. That Texas was never going to accept her at the main campus. I like to freely and easily share with any kids that will listen. I actually got kicked out of college the first time for poor scholarship. Maybe I turned out okay. That was a nice introduction for Mr. Castellano. Kids stumble. They make mistakes. They can recover. I had to figure out if I went to a junior college and got all A's, I would have a 2.01 and I could get back into a state 4-year university. So what can we do to be reasonable about academic pressure along the lines of do your best? Not everybody can be in the top 10% of your class. So definitely overwhelming pressure academically is a contributing factor. I've already talked about the importance of talking with your child. We need to really increase what I like to call the circle of care. That's the school, that's the parents, that's community personnel, all communicating and basically being there for a particular child. The other points that are up there have pretty well been made. Now, here's what I often hear from parents. How do I know my kid is really depressed? I mean, let's be honest. Aren't all teenagers moody, irritable, they're withdrawing? She's preparing me for she's going away to Tallahassee to school next year. Well, Mom and Dad, let me ask you a couple of questions. Is this persistent? Has this gone on for 2 or 3 weeks or more? Yes, as a matter of fact. Is it pervasive? Is it affecting home, school, and peers? Yes. Has she dropped out of what was previously a pleasurable activity? As a matter of fact, yes. She was always on the dance team. I couldn't believe it this year when she said, I don't want to be on the dance team anymore. You have a depressed teenager. About 20% of teens suffer from depression at some point during those tumultuous years. The sad fact, about 80% get no treatment whatsoever. I gave a talk earlier today, and I said, you know, it's baseball season. I look back on 26 years of working full-time in schools, trying to convince parents they needed to get professional help for their child outside of school. What was my batting average? It was about 2 out of 10. And I tried to be as persuasive as possible. It's stigma. It's lack of resources. Those are the things that are holding us back from getting help for our kids. It's also denial. I've found parents to be very high on denial. If you actually recognize the problem, you got to do something about it. And maybe you won't be sleeping so well at night. So depression, it's not something a kid can just snap out of. They need professional help. They need those evidence-based treatments. So what might be the signs of cyberbullying? The signs of suicide are a lot more clearly stated and known, but they may be depressed, they may be withdrawing, they may be anxious. I actually got a call just today from my niece and nephew. They're concerned about their 10-year-old. He appears depressed, low energy, he's anxious. And as they kept talking, I mean, it became really clear. And they already knew what I was going to say. you need to get mental health treatment for your 5th grader. Now, what's the good news that I could share with you tonight? Suicide is very rare at the elementary level. But what do I hear all over the country? More and more 4th and 5th graders are talking about suicide. And I always hear from school staff and parents, do I have to take it seriously every single time? The answer to that is absolutely yes. You must take it seriously. I know it's frustrating that your kid can't say, I'm really mad about X. They shouldn't have to say, I want to kill myself for us to give them attention. I'm really sorry to tell you that I've had to respond to suicides of kids as young as 9. You know what one dad told me the day after his son died? He said, I thought I had hidden all the ropes. Now, I'm not going to make that dad feel any worse than he already feels, but obviously I wished he'd asked for help. He'd have gotten his kid mental health treatment and realized that trying to hide all of the ropes, that alone was not going to be the answer. But then in the middle school and the high school age groups, we have a tremendous problem with suicide. I'm also sorry to tell you that suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death for college students as well. So back to cyberbullying signs. There may be a lot of somatic complaints. They may not want to go to school. They may be seeing the nurse many times for those somatic complaints. They may be very secretive about cell phone usage as well as computers. And we've got to keep up. Now, this is the hard part. Because if your child is the technology guru in your family, you're already really behind. Just the other day, I heard about an app. It's called Secret Calculator. So the bottom line is we think it's a calculator, right? Well, one of my students just last night said she has Secret Calculator. That is where you can hide all the apps that you don't want other people to know you have. You put them all in Secret Calculator. And I don't claim to be a tremendous expert on technology, but the Pembroke Pines Charter Schools has those experts, and it's really up to them to keep all of us apprised with, like, what's the latest thing we need to be watching out for. So there's the definition of bullying. And by the way, perhaps the most famous person in the world about bullying is a guy named Oveus from Norway. Why did he get really involved in bullying prevention? A bunch of middle schoolers in Norway killed themselves, and they were all victims of bullying. So there's this definition. And we're going to talk more definitely about, like, what do we really need to do? And here's the slide on the strong association, but again, it's not causation between suicide and bullying. There's the website at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center where they summarized 40 research studies and concluded association, yes. And I want to repeat the point. You know your kid's a victim of bullying. Do not hesitate to ask them about hopelessness, thoughts of giving up, and yes, ask about thoughts of suicide. So what do we need to do when we know a kid is actually bullying other people? Well, we need to let them know there are going to be consequences. The consequences are inevitable. They will escalate if the bullying continues. And I am not keeping this a secret. I will be watching. I'll be watching the coaches. I'll ask them to be watching. I will be asking all school personnel. We have to hold them accountable for their behavior. And we need to try to get at why are they behaving this way. So for decades in our schools, we would always ask, why does this kid act this way? Well, the thinking is more, what has happened to this kid that is causing them to act this way? So let's try to get at what's going on in the bully's life. By the way, why don't we want to pick up the phone if we work in the schools and call the parents of the bully? See, we hesitate. I'm being really honest. Why do we hesitate? We're thinking the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. We're afraid that the parents of the bully are going to yell at us. And I'm wondering if you've ever heard of the documentary called Bullied. It was done by the Southern Law Poverty Center. It's the story of Jamie Nabosny. Jamie Nabosny was the first kid in America to ever successfully sue his school for failing to protect him from harassment. And it's designed to get us all talking, to get kids talking, to get adults talking about what can we all do together to drastically reduce bullying. On my very first slide, I had the Department of Education's website, Stop Bullying Now, which has tremendous resources for schools and for families. But one of the things that Jamie Nabosny says in that documentary, when something happens to you enough times, you start to think you deserve it. No kid deserves to be the victim of bullying. And we need to tell them that. You do not deserve this. I'm going to be here for you every single step of the way, and we are going to get this stopped. Now, what about the conversation with the parents of the bully? I like to open every conversation with a discussion of something positive, but then if their kid truly is the bully, we're going to have to talk directly and honestly about that. And then hopefully, with this sandwich approach, we close our conference with something positive. And we're hoping that the parents of the bully will pay more attention, especially pay more attention to the online behavior and help their child to develop more empathy for others. And the kid that's a bully needs to experience consequences. Now, their worth as a person should never be in question. Every kid makes mistakes. When they make mistakes, we need to separate their misbehavior from their worth as a person. So we need to love and support them, but kids need consequences. It is that simple. So, bystanders. The literature is going to say they're present about 80% of the time. They have a tremendous opportunity to either intervene or at least document. And especially with cyberbullying, it's almost like the more kids that are online, the less likely somebody is going to speak up and try to stop the bullying. Now, many people have said, and I agree with them, the term bystander is way too passive. In reality, we should use the term upstander, or we should use the term witness. When you're a witness to something, that seems to imply you are supposed to document. By the way, let's see if you can finish this sentence for me. Snitches get, unfortunately, everybody knows that phrase. So why don't kids come forward? They don't think the adults can help. They think it's only going to get worse. Or they'll frankly say, I have been conditioned not to tell. And by the way, if I had a chance to talk to your children, here would be my first question. Who is your go-to adult at school? Who is your go-to adult at home and in the community? When do I get the most concerned? If a kid does not have go-to adults at home and school. We have to develop trusting relationships between kids and the adults in their life. So, bystanders, they just really don't know what to do. So let's imagine that there's a little bullying going on. Maybe it's a community event. Maybe we're about to have a soccer game. Maybe we're about to have a dance recital. And the sponsor kind of hurries by, even knowing that there was bullying going on. What message did that give all those kids? But the sponsor might say, I'm one person. How do I make it a teachable moment for the bystanders? How do I provide consequences for the bully and support the victim? I'm one person, and I only have a few minutes before our activity was supposed to commence. So it's really important that adults step forward and get involved in this. So schools and cyberbullying. I talked about it being a slippery slope, but we have to investigate. We need to support the victim. We need to let everybody know that bullying is not acceptable, and conference with parents. And in particular, if bodily harm was threatened, I believe we need to be working with the police because a threat was made. So, key points for school staff. These kids cannot work this out on their own because one person has all the power in the relationship. Let the victim know how they're going to be supported. If this keeps happening, you must continue to tell me. And in all honesty, we start with the teacher. But what if the teacher doesn't do much? Then you go to the assistant principal or the principal. What if they really don't respond? Then we need to go to the superintendent and let them know this is what's happening to my kid, and this is not acceptable. So, student involvement. Great data would be as simple as if we surveyed all the kids in the Pembroke Pines charter schools, what would they tell us? Are they bullied at school? Are they bullied at community events? Is it cyberbullying? What are their biggest concerns? And bullying is not something that a single classroom teacher can solve. We're really talking about something that needs to be school-wide, throughout the entire charter system, something that needs input from all of the students, very importantly, and then input from all of the families as well. And then we also need what is called anonymous reporting. And in Colorado, I'm pretty impressed with, they have what's called Safe to Tell. It's 24 hours a day. It is publicized with all of the young people in Colorado. And I had occasion to talk to Susan Payne, the executive director, and I asked her, okay, what are most of the Safe to Tell calls about? Well, number one is bullying. Number two is about depression and suicide. Number three is about school violence. So there's actually a national movement to create a national Safe to Tell program. But kids need to speak up, and we need to provide a way for them to do it anonymously. I mean, I wish they would just do it face-to-face with a trusted adult, but if they won't, then they need opportunities to do it anonymously. What if my kid is identified as the bully? Well, the bottom line is, I hope you will not be defensive. We are not attacking you or your parenting skills. We simply want to work with you and with your child to eliminate the cyberbullying behavior. And we need the parents to basically provide consequences and increase supervision of their online behavior. Maybe no screen can go in the bedroom anymore, at least not until a kid earns a little more respect and improves their behavior. What are their strengths? You know what my favorite question is to ask a parent, no matter what the reason for our conference, here's what I'm always going to begin with. Tell me the things you truly love and enjoy about your child. Let's talk about the positive things first. Then we're probably going to have to get to some things that aren't exactly good news. And you know, I believe that every kid does far more right than wrong. Have you ever heard of what's called the 5-to-1 rule? Well, basically, all of us do the best when we are complimented 5 times for something we have done really well, and then we get that one criticism. So, very important with our children to make sure we are constantly complimenting them on all of the things they do right. And I'm going to argue every kid, I don't care how many problems they have, they do far more things right than they do wrong. And I sincerely hope you will see the school administration as a source of help, somebody who wants to work with you to make situations better. But what if your kid is the victim of cyberbullying? Well, frankly, you need documentation. You need to take screenshots. You're going to need to produce images so we can truly get to the bottom of what is actually happening. And then, very important, to always ask your child, what can I do to help? And our first instinct, if our kid is the victim of cyberbullying, might be to take away all of their technology. But now we're punishing them. So, increasing supervision, talking with them about what is going to help. And then take a step back and consider your emotions. Don't immediately grab the phone. Don't immediately charge over to the home of the kid who is cyberbullying your child. Take a moment, calm yourself down, and think about the best way to proceed, which I believe is working through the school or working through the sponsor of the community event. Who are the adults that are in charge of the activity where the bullying is happening? We've already talked a little bit about who to contact at school. I suggested starting with the teacher. Then if there's no real results, you're going to have to move on up through the administrative chain. What could you do to help your kid be more resistant to bullying? The bottom line is, you know what I hope for every one of your children? There is something they really feel that they're very good at. Some activity, some experience that they look forward to. I mean, I hope it happens every day, but maybe it only happens once a week, where they go to a particular activity where they feel good about themselves, where they're treated with the utmost level of respect. Because that can go a long way to helping them deal with some other really difficult situations. And in talking to my nephew today, and he was sharing, bottom line, his fifth grader doesn't seem to really have any friends. And sometimes it only takes one. Only takes one good friend, and that can get you through so much in this world. And I talked earlier about the importance of kids living in a stable home with unconditional love. And I do believe those kids can overcome almost anything. And so important that we all strive for that stability and demonstrating that unconditional love. And McDonald's has a saying about the full value meal. But you know where it really is? It's at your home. It's around your kitchen table. And somehow I know I'm not the only person here that experienced a divorce. But we need to make sure that we have times when everybody sits down together. And there are going to be so many milestones in your children's lives. Mom and dad, regardless of the status of their relationship, they need to both be there. They need to be nice. They need to be celebrating, whether it's the birthday or the middle school graduation, whatever it is. We need to be very careful not to put our children in the middle. What helped for me? My ex-wife is a psychologist. We both knew. We need to speak positively about each other to our children. Now, that's such an easy thing for me to say, but in reality, I'm aware of so many situations where the kid feels the messenger all the time. They feel in the middle. Mom and dad are acting out their frustrations and emotions through their children. So, protective factors, these are pretty straightforward. I don't know that I really need to outline all of these, but you might be wondering, where did they come from? The World Health Organization. Several points tonight have been made about the importance of stable families, the importance of every kid feeling good about themselves. You know what I wish I could do? I wish I could give you magic dust, and you could take it home tonight and sprinkle it over the heads of all of those children that you love so much, and that magic dust would just make them know I'm loved, I'm a good person. There are lots of ups and downs in life, but whatever comes along, I am going to get through it, and I'm going to know to get help. And if we go back to the video that we started with about Alexandra, unfortunately, it doesn't look like Alexandra went to anybody for help. Doesn't look like she went to a teacher or a counselor. Doesn't look like she went to her dance coach. And unfortunately, she never really told her parents. And how do we create the atmosphere where kids just know, I go to an adult for help? And obviously, we want them to get along well with their peers. We want them involved in school activities, extracurricular activities. But I only have one thing I want to say, and here it is. I think you should ask your children, what activity do you want to do this season? And you will pick only one. Because my experience has been the extracurricular activities often cause kids stress because the school team, the club team, they conflict. The school play, the community play, they conflict. I think you want your kids' lives to revolve around your family. So let's try to make sure that the extracurricular things are not causing stress. Those are supposed to be enjoyable. Those are supposed to be for fun. And access to mental health care is critically important. I shouldn't say this, but I will. Bottom line, in America, if you're not affluent and don't have good health insurance, you're in trouble. We need mental health care for everybody, regardless of their income level. And go home and ask your children, who are the significant adults in your life? Who would you go to for help? Best practices. We got to talk about responsibility online. We got to talk about digital citizenship. We need to start that in the early grades. That school handbook should talk about cyberbullying and the consequences of being a cyberbully. We need to realize online and offline bullying behavior are intertwined. We need a task force on bullying prevention. We need to accept we have a responsibility to intervene. And the most powerful element in any bullying prevention program, that is going to be the students themselves. And you know what I sincerely hope? I hope every kid in Broward County who walks into a school tomorrow sincerely feels like somebody cared whether they showed up or not. That's easy for me to say, but how do we make sure every kid feels connected in their schools? And don't hesitate to ask your kids about thoughts of bullying. And another good approach would be, have you been aware of any of your friends? Did they ever talk about depression and suicide? What could you do to help them? Oh, nobody's ever talked about that. But what if somebody ever did? What could you do if your friend is a victim of bullying? What could you do if your friend has thoughts of suicide? I mentioned the 4 cabinets. To be honest, so many tragedies could be prevented if parents just took charge of the medicine cabinet, the liquor cabinet, the gun cabinet. By the way, where do you think most kids get the guns that they bring to school and shoot people with? Where do they get those guns? When are we going to hold those adults accountable and take charge of the internet? The technology, and it's hard for me to imagine where the technology might be in a decade and how many more of our children that technology might have stolen. So let's take charge of some of this now. I mean, the bottom line is you are the parent. And I think parents need to be reminded of that. You are the parent. You are in charge of so many of these things. At an early age, you have to be really alert to what are called mean behaviors when kids are talking rudely to each other. And of course, we need to monitor being kind and compassionate. So, a couple of websites for you. There's the stopbullying.gov from the U.S. Department of Education. There's a website called cyberbullying.org. There's an excellent book. I already talked about Common Sense Media. And I'd be remiss today not to give you some resources about suicide prevention. And the Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention, they actually have a table outside. And I believe it's victims advocates that are giving away a gun lock. I choose not to own guns. But if you have one and you have a child, go out there and pick up that gun lock. Thank you very much.
My goodness. A lot of information tonight. A lot of information tonight. A couple things I want to say before you all leave. As Dr. Poland said, please go out front at one of the tables out there. The League of Women Voters are graciously giving out as many gun locks as you need to keep your guns safe. Please stop and get them. Please stop at the table for FISP and pick up information about agencies and resources. Please stop at the 211 table. They also will be able to provide you with information and resources. Before I leave you, I want you to listen to the words of a song. I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, because we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say. No one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send a flood, going to drown them out. I am brave. I am bruised. I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching to the beat I drum. I am not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me. I won't let them break me down to dust. I know there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send a flood, going to drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised. I make no apologies. This is me. Our children are telling us, this is me. This is who they are. And we have to help them really figure out who they are and make them not be ashamed of who they are and not have these bullying words make them feel less than what they are. Remember the words in one of the movies from a little while back about a maid who was telling a beautiful young girl, you are kind, you are smart, you are beautiful. That explains every one of our children. Kind, smart, beautiful. We need to make sure that they know that. We need to tell them every single day how precious they are to us. They are a gift that we are given. And with that gift comes great responsibility. You all tonight make me very, very proud that you are here and you are saying, we understand that there are issues out there and we don't want to bury our heads in the sand. Please provide us with as much information as possible that we can take back to our families and we can empower our children to become the best that they can be, to be proud of themselves, and for them to be able to stand up and say, I am who I am, and this is me. So I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that we will continue having these series, and as long as you want them, we will keep doing them. Thank you all for coming out. Have a great evening. And when you go home tonight, please hug that precious piece and give them a big kiss also. Thank you.